Welcome everyone to the Women's Association of Hilton Head Islands special event series. It really began as a seed, as an idea back last year with our past president, Tamara Averett. She said, we need to start like a special series. And so she wanted to do a special on the environment. Special series on the environment. And so she did. And in the spring, it was very well attended on the turtles and the birds and the dolphins. And so when Betty Hamilton became our president this year, as you know, our theme is resilience after COVID, or we're again still really dealing with COVID, but how we as women are resilient and how we're flexible and how we come back and say yes. And so she said, maybe we could have a special series on resilience, speakers, and maybe an author. Well, that's what we have today. We have Ramie Liddle. What an amazing book. It's called Driving Miss Norma. I hope you've read it. I have to tell you, I'm halfway through. So I started it yesterday and it is powerful. Ramie wrote it with her husband, Tim Bauerschmidt. And it's about Tim's mother, who at 90 years old was diagnosed with cancer. And she decided to say yes to life instead of getting all of the treatment, the chemo and the radiation. And so Tim and Ramie and Norma set off in an RV all over the country. There's so many lessons. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. So with that, I'm going to bring in the interviewer for Ramie, and that is my colleague, Janet Porter. Hey, Janet, how are you today?
Hi, Robin. And you can't forget Ringo, who is a standard there's prominently in the book, and Ramie's on the cover. I've got the book too. So there's Ramie. There's Ringo. So we don't want to forget Ringo.
Well, and I love that there are the pictures in the middle of the book, are all the pictures that Ramie took of all the various stops that they took on their travels. I do want to put in, before we begin our interview with Ramie, I would like to put in a quick little plug for the author series. Our next author is an author that I'm sure most of you have heard of, read her books, Marie Benedict, and she will be on 11/11, November the 11th. And with her new book, The Personal Librarian. Of course, she has written The Other Einstein, The Only Woman in the Room. And then on December the 9th, after our luncheon at the Sonesta later in the afternoon, we will have Sarah Penner, and she wrote the book, The Lost Apothecary. And as Janet said, you have that chat button. So please feel free to ask your questions, make your comments as we move through the journey of this fantastic, book. It's a book, but it's much more than a book, Janet. It's a story of life. It's a story of celebration of life. So with that, I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm so excited to meet Ramie.
Thank you so much, Robin. You know, a lot of times when you fall in love with a book, you remember who recommended it to you. I don't actually remember how I found out about Driving Miss Norma, but I found out about it shortly after it was published. And this is a heartfelt memoir of the journey of Ramie and Tim with their mother-in-law, Miss Norma, a memoir of their journey across country and back in their 36-foot motorhome. I loved the book so much. I bought a case of books and I passed them out to everybody I knew. And then you'll find out more about that in a minute. But meanwhile, when I was here, I did a session on Driving Miss Norma at the Hilton Head Library. And then I did something for lifelong learning. I was making everyone read it. And then lo and behold, I'm active with Hospice Care of the Low Country. And lo and behold, Maggie Clark called me one day, our director of volunteers, and she was screaming. And she had just finished the book, because I make everybody read it, and on Friday. And on Monday, she got a phone call from Ramie Liddle saying she wanted to be a volunteer with Ringo at Hospice Care of the Low Country. Well, I was thrilled. I mean, this is like if you love Sarah Paretsky or you love To Kill a Mockingbird and you get to meet Harper Lee, although of course she's passed away. I mean, to get to meet the author of your favorite book when she lives all the way across the country was just an amazing, amazing treat for me. And so Tim and Ramie and I became friends when they were here on Hilton Head, and we'll talk more about that later. So I recommended this book for really two reasons. One is that the theme this year, you know, is resilience, and this book is really all about resilience. And the second reason is because Hilton Head is featured prominently in the book, and we're going to talk about that with Ramie. So Ramie, if you would just join us now, turn your video on.
There I
Hi,
am.
Ramie. It's good to see you
Hello.
again.
Same. This is so fun.
Yes. So, Ramie, I'm going to do a little introduction of you, and you can act really humble while I do this.
I'm
So,
already
Ramie,
crying between you and Robin.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Cindy Gavon just wrote and said in the chat, "I so love this book; it made me laugh and cry." So that's another unsolicited testimonial. So, Ramie Liddle is really a modern day nomad. She retired at the age of 50 to travel around the United States and Baja California in a 19-foot Airstream trailer with her husband Tim Bauerschmidt, and as I said, their standard poodle Ringo. Ramie's life changed suddenly when her father-in-law in Michigan died in the summer of 2015. And a mere 2 days later, his wife of 67 years, 90-year-old Miss Norma, was diagnosed with uterine cancer. Norma refused treatment, and the carefree trio suddenly became mobile assisted living adventures, taking Norma on the ride of her life. After accidentally creating a follower of over 500,000 Facebook followers, Ramie co-authored with Tim the best-selling book, Driving Miss Norma, an inspirational story about really matters at the end of life. She is currently a sought-after keynote speaker and is widely regarded for her authenticity and insight into caregiving and what matters most at the end of life. So let's start, Ramie, with where are you right now?
We're as far away as we possibly can be from you, I think, and still be in the continental US. We're on San Juan Island in Washington State.
So we'll talk about how you and Tim got there sort of towards the end after we talk about the book. So so tell us a little bit. Let's start by telling us a little bit about the life that you and Tim had as nomads before you began traveling with Miss Norma.
Sure. Like you said, we lived in a tiny little 19-foot Airstream travel trailer, and we were pretty carefree. And we spent the winters mostly in Baja, Mexico, and would make our way eventually in the summertime to northern Michigan, where Tim's parents lived. And we would do their honey-do list and spend some time with our friends up there and enjoy the summers with them. And traveled around the country the rest of the time, and had a chosen community of our dear friends are spread out everywhere. So we made a point to spend some time with them along the way.
So then tell us what happened in the summer of 2015.
In 2015, Norma's brother died in early June, and we talked to them on the phone, and his parents, and they said, yeah, we're doing okay. We're just really sad. And we understand that you won't be able to get to the funeral in time. And by the time we did, like a week later, we arrived in their driveway and recognized that they weren't doing okay, and that Tim's dad was very sick, and things were going downhill quickly. 10 days after we arrived there, his father died. It was really intense time for us, and it was not a what you might call a good death. It was really troubling. And while he was dying in the hospital, Tim's mom just kind of tugged on me at one point and said, will you take me downstairs? I have an appointment. And 2 floors down in the hospital, on the way down in the elevator, she said, yeah, I just have some bleeding, and they don't know what it is, so they're going to run some tests. And that was the first that we heard that anything was going on with Norma. So that was a whirlwind of managing the end of life for Leo, and then also understanding what was going on with Norma all in the same week. By 2 days after Leo had died, we were slated to go to the gynecologist to get kind of the final diagnosis of what was going on with Norma. And right before that, we had some lunch and had a conversation and said, Norma, it's possible that this doctor won't have great news. And she said, yeah, I know. And if that's the case, if it's cancer or something like that, I don't want chemotherapy or radiation or any of that nonsense. Let's just leave it be. And so with that said, we figured that we had 2 options, really. The other thing that she made very clear was that she couldn't care for herself. She and Leo were a well-oiled team. So we said, well, we could find a long-term care facility for you. Or like many adult children of aging parents, we offered her to move in with us, or you could live with us. And she knew that our house had wheels. We also said, you can think about it. We don't have to have a decision right away. We have plenty to do. Whenever you're ready to tell us what your next step is, we will honor it no matter what. A minute and a half later, she crunched on her dill pickle at the lunch table and said, I think I'd like to come along. And we were thrilled with that answer, but at the same time, we hadn't talked about it. We didn't have a pro and con list. We didn't consider, what is this going to do to our marriage? How are we going to care for someone who is not well? That we honestly really didn't know very well. Tim left home at 19 years old and didn't know his mom super well. And we said, okay, we'll figure it out. And so we went to the gynecologist. Sure enough, he laid out the course of the rest of her life. You have uterine cancer. We'll start out with surgery, then chemotherapy, radiation, a therapeutic nursing home, and then long-term care, and laid out the rest of her life. And she sat up in her wheelchair in his office and just said, I'm 90 years old. I'm hitting the road. And
I love that quote. That's my favorite quote. Hell no, I'm 90 years old. I'm hitting the road.
I know. And the doctor, he's probably 35 and looked at us like, what is she talking about? And so very quickly we said, we live kind of an unconventional life. And, this is what we're thinking. And I guess we need to know if we're being irresponsible. And the doctor then really changed his tune. And he said, as doctors, we see this every day. And we see what really happens, that it's possible she doesn't survive the surgery. It's highly likely she could end up in ICU. There's horrible side effects, especially at this age. And if it were me, I would want to be in that motorhome. And so he gave us his blessing, and off we went.
So let's start with that first. So, you described Miss Norma as petite, introverted, quiet, 90 years old. In the, how long were they had lived in that town in Michigan?
Oh, decades,
Decades.
30, I think 37 years or something like that.
So
Yeah.
In the same home for 37 years. Were you surprised that she said, I'm going for the gusto and wanted to go with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She was a woman of very few words. Her husband was always the life of the party and always, armed with a joke when he walked into a room. And Norma was the quiet wife behind him that, was always quick to smile, but didn't really blossom so much. And all of a sudden she said, yep, let's do this.
So you quickly realized the 19-foot Airstream's not going to work. You buy a 36-foot mobile home, right?
Yeah, motorhome. Uh-huh.
Motorhome. And how did you decide where to go? Talk about that. Because you guys were nomads, you were kind of just making it up as you go along.
Yeah. And we had been, we've been a lot of places. And so we had some ideas, but really wanted to hear from her. Like, what's on your bucket list? Well, she certainly didn't have a bucket list. And it was like pulling teeth to try to figure out where she wanted to go. But there were a couple things she mentioned. She wanted to see Mount Rushmore. She was really interested in New Mexico, but never really able to articulate why. And so we write quite a bit about our journey in New Mexico in the book as well. But we knew enough about her that she loves the natural world. And so the national parks were something that made really good sense for us to at least get started. So we left northern Michigan and went across kind of the upper tier of the country, made it to Mount Rushmore and then to Yellowstone and the Tetons, and then into Colorado and checking out the national parks was our first kind of strategy, and then we took it from there.
So meanwhile, Ramie, you start blogging, right?
Mm.
I mean, are you just writing on Facebook? Is that all you're doing?
Well, before we had Norma, I kept kind of a more formal travel blog. but it's cumbersome, and caregiving is hard and takes a lot of time. And I thought, I can't do that. I don't have the wherewithal to keep up with that. And I also was recognizing that I was falling into a depression, thinking, I never had my own child. Do I really know how to care for another human being? And Tim encouraged me to start photographing. He's like, you love your camera, so go out and take some pictures of nature and, help that depression a little bit. And I quickly realized that the subject of my photography that was most enjoyable wasn't nature at that point, it was Norma. And so there's, we talk a little bit about that in the book, but the Facebook page I put up there just so my friends and family, my mom really knew where we were. So we had about a dozen people that were following along to begin with. And then I would just, put a few pictures of Norma up there as we went along. And that's how we got started.
So Miss Norma, you have many adventures with Miss Norma, and we're not going to ruin the whole story in the book about that, but let's just talk about New Mexico for a minute, because there is a reason she wanted to go to New Mexico. So tell us about that part.
Yeah, like I said, she really couldn't articulate why she wanted to go, but she said, I think I really want to go to New Mexico. And so I was trying to figure out, what are the things that people go to New Mexico for? And it's, the hot air balloon festival, or it's to go to Roswell to look for aliens, or there's a Native American culture, what could it possibly be? And I finally realized that one day we were just having lunch, and I looked across the table at Tim, and he was wearing this t-shirt that Norma had given to him years ago. And it had the logo of a Native American children's charity on it. And Norma always gave, some money to that charity. And I thought, oh, she has an interest in Native American culture. And so I spent some time really trying to figure out how we can explore that in a real authentic way. And so I won't go into the incredible day. I will tell you, it was my favorite day of the entire trip. Was something that we discovered in New Mexico with Norma and a Native American tribe. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's a very special part of the book. I'm glad we're not ruining it. So tell us a little bit more about, as you're on this journey with her, what you're discovering about her. Or in the early part of the journey, aren't you discovering much still, because she's so quiet and introverted?
She was pretty quiet. I don't know, it was probably the first week, and we were really nervous about how she was doing. We really didn't have a clear idea of how sick she really was. Anytime she had a little cough, we thought, oh, that's it, she's gonna die. We're not even gonna make it out west, and we didn't know what we were doing. And we were in Minnesota, in Blue Earth, Minnesota, and we happen to know that that's the home of the world's largest Jolly Green Giant statue. And so we thought, let's go find, it was in a Walmart parking lot of all places. And so we took her there, and still she's super quiet. And we said, let's go check this out. And we wheeled her over in a wheelchair to this statue. And she happened to have a green sweater on that day, totally not planned. She looked up at this statue that was 55 feet tall. She locked the wheels of her wheelchair, handed Tim her cane, and stood in front of the Jolly Green Giant with her hands on her hips, just like he was posed, and just was like, ho, ho, ho. And we buckled over in laughter, like we'd never seen this part of this woman. And at that moment, she kind of turned from Norma and mom to Miss Norma. Like there's some life in her that we never saw before. And we're going to have a good time. And that's when she kind of taught us that, don't be so uptight about this. Let's just go have a nice journey. Let's just go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the reasons that I love this book, for many reasons, and, Cindy just wrote in and said, hey, Ramie's so real and a great storyteller. Glad to hear the story from her point of view. So please chat in any questions you have while we're talking to Ramie tonight. So tell us how you ended up coming to Hilton Head, because here you are traveling around the United States. You've gone from Michigan all the way across the Northwest, down to the state park, all the way across the South. Tell us how you ended up at Hilton Head. Let's have a little local flavor on your visit.
Oh my gosh. So like Janet, you mentioned at the beginning that we now have still, 5 years later, 6 years later, almost 500,000 Facebook followers. So, things blew up. We didn't want them to blow up. It was terrifying. And at some point, right before we started heading towards the Low Country, we finally kind of came to terms with it and embraced this new celebrity status that Norma had. And lots of people were writing and inviting us to do different things. And we got a message from Charlie Clark, who is with the Hilton Head Chamber. And she said, come to Hilton Head, we'll take you on a dolphin cruise. And, we have this beautiful island and wonderful people. And we'd love to have you here. And we were like, yeah, put it on the list with everyone else. And then we found ourselves at Hilton Head. We decided that might be a good place to stop. And like we do often when we would pull into a campground, Tim and I would have to get the RV set up and plugged into power and everything. And we would grab the tourist brochures at the front desk of the check-in at the campground and hand them to Norma and say, okay, this is where we are. Let us know what you want to do. And typically her answer is, oh, it all looks nice. I don't really care. Whatever you want. And the day that we pulled into Hilton Head and handed her the brochures and the local paper, she looked at it. And by the time we got the RV hooked up, she said, there's a parade tomorrow and I'd like to go. And it was the St. Patrick's Day parade on Hilton Head Island. And we were like, oh boy, like, how do we take her to this giant parade in the wheelchair? We don't know where we're going. We don't know where to park. How are we going to do this? So we remembered hearing from Charlie Clark. And so we quickly found her email and said, I know you invited us to go for a dolphin cruise, but Norma wants to come to the parade and we just need a recommendation of what could be kind of handicapped accessible for her to watch the parade. And so she wrote back right away and said, oh, you can park here, here, here. And then about 3 minutes later, she wrote back again and she said, we have an extra green convertible. How would Norma like to be in the parade? And we read that to her and she just went, now we're talking. And so sure enough, I wasn't, Tim and Norma and Ringo were in the Hilton Head Island Parade that year. And that's how it all started. And
when I have to tell you, Ramie, I've never told you this. When I spoke at the Hilton Head Library, there were people who had been on the sidelines watching the parade and remembered seeing Miss Norma and didn't connect that they were at a speech, of, that I was talking about a book where they had actually met the person and they kind of went, aha, we remember her from the parade. So she left a big impression on people.
Yeah.
So, you go back up the East Coast, etc. And now people start mentioning to you that you want to turn all your blogging into a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So talk about that.
We heard that a lot from just people that were following us. And then we started hearing from literary agents and things like that. And the whole time, Tim and I are like, are you kidding? Like, we don't have time to write a book. We're busy and we don't know how to write a book. And so we just, would either ignore the requests, from the literary agents or write them back and say thanks. But, that's not what we're about. We're just trying to have a good time and provide her with a nice kind of end of life. And then we got a message from a young woman who was touched by our story. I mean, we got millions of messages. One day, 106,000 new messages in one day. So yeah, it was insane. And we got this message from this young woman who was the caregiver for her grandmother with cancer. She just passed and was really touched by our story. And it helped her along the way within her caregiving journey. And at the bottom, she said, by the way, I work for a literary agent and you have a great story if you ever want to talk about it. And there was something about the energy that she put into the letter that she wrote to us that felt different and safe. And so we reached back out to her and she ended up being kind of our mentor in writing our book. So
You meet with a literary agent, and tell us how that goes.
well, they were all excited to do like kind of a Humans of New York kind of short story book with us. And we said, we're not going to sign with anyone until we sit down and, break bread with people, and get to know them. And so she said, well, that's cool. Then come park in our driveway. And so she was in Eastern Pennsylvania. So we made our way after our visit to Philadelphia and parked there and had dinner and really got to know her. And then a couple days later, she said, hey, you want to go to New York City? I have some appointments lined up. And the next thing you know, we are, in the offices of Simon and Schuster and Rodale Press and, planes, trains, and automobiles around New York with all of these things. And our book ended up going to auction and getting picked up by HarperCollins. It was crazy.
And it's picked up based on having read some of your blogs, right? I mean, have you even written chapters or anything at this point?
We hadn't written a sentence yet. No.
You hadn't written a sentence. And your book gets sold to HarperCollins.
Yeah. In 11 countries.
And well, I love the part where you told me that you and Tim told me that you put the book up for auction and you went, oh, okay, it's auction. And they went, no, those are domestic rights. And then it goes up for auction for international rights.
Yeah.
And so tell us how they thought the book would be written with a ghostwriter.
Yeah, at first we said, we don't know. One, we don't have time. And two, we're intelligent enough people, but we're not book writers. We're not authors. We don't know how to do that kind of writing. And they said, that's all right, we'll get a ghostwriter. And so they hooked us up with this woman that was going to write the book for us. And she came and embedded with us for a couple of days. And we recognized right away, this is our story to tell. And so she went away and we ended up writing the book.
And so the book is written in a chapter by you and a chapter by Tim, a chapter by you and a chapter by Tim. So tell us how you decided on that format.
We didn't want to get divorced. And so
that was one of your objectives. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We recognize that we have unique perspective on the story, and both perspectives I think were worth telling. His relationship with his mom is a critical piece of the story. And then my perspective as an in-law and what it looks like. And so it just made sense to us that we told it that way, and it seemed to work out. They liked what we proposed, and we just rolled with it, and we're still married happily.
Thanks for that footnote. You hadn't mentioned Tim lately, so I was a little worried. So let's talk about the lessons learned that you learned from this adventure and how it affected you as both a daughter-in-law and just as a human being.
There's so much, at first when we were talking to this literary agent, we said, look, if you want a book of, the 101 pieces of advice from a 90-year-old, we don't have that book. Again, Norma was quiet and reserved but as we look back on that trip, the lessons that we learned about particularly end of life, and that it's not over until it's over. And that there's so many wonderful adventures to be had, and that the key for us was communication and understanding. It comes down to, now that I understand the language, it's advanced directive language, and the idea that we really understood what Norma's wishes were. And then we were able to go for it from there. It's not a spoiler alert that she dies at the end, and we connected with hospice in the town that we happened to be in when her health declined. And the nurse practitioner gave us kind of the prescription of, yes, you're qualified for hospice, and we'll, send the staff out tomorrow. And we left the hospital and went straight to the county fair. She said, I hope they have elephant ears there. I'd really like to have one and maybe ride the Ferris wheel. That's how she was teaching us about dying, was that there's still life to be lived. And so many other lessons, but that's the one that really sits in my heart. And that communication piece really helped.
Ramie, the other thing that a lot of people, in fact, Robin mentioned this when we were talking about where she is in the book. A lot of people mentioned how envious they were that you got to have, that Tim in particular got to have that time with his mother, but you got to have that time with your mother-in-law to really get to know her. And that, a comment I've heard from a lot of people is that they're envious of the fact that you made that investment and really got to know her as a person. Do you hear that a lot as you go around and do your speaking?
I don't know, I don't know if I hear it as much as maybe someone who's unrelated to us like you would hear it, but I remember the day that we were doing her kind of celebration of life. The week after she died, we planted a tree in Friday Harbor, Washington, which is where we were when she died, and had this beautiful celebration of life. Strangers from all over, we put it out on Facebook and said, come on, anyone's welcome. But we're on an island. It's an 1.5-hour ferry ride to get here. But 50 people strangers came on the ferry to pay their respects. And we did hear it from them when they were visiting with us. They said, the reason we're here is because our families aren't like this. And you had something special that we all wish we could have had.
Yes. Another thing, Ramie, is particularly, this was all pre-COVID, of course. Yeah. And, I think the book is also so inspiring because it's almost a love letter about Americans. It's almost an homage to Americans, because in all these communities, they know she's coming and they embrace her. And she was in a parade at Hilton Head, but she has many other adventures that we won't spoil spill the beans on. But I was so in awe, and I know you were in awe of how much people embraced you and welcomed you with open arms. That was a surprise, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, we've been traveling for a long time, and we know that there's such a beauty in this country that maybe others that haven't had those opportunities maybe not see as much. But holy cow, when we traveled with Norma, it felt like we were on a wave of love across this country that was just outstanding. Like there was I don't know. It's really hard to explain. We were riding high, kind of on this plane of love that we had never experienced before. But there's some beautiful people in this country. Absolutely.
And tell us about the couple that you met in one of the parks where you were parked with your motorhome, who Norma bonded with, and where she had lost a daughter and Norma had lost a daughter. Norma's daughter had died. And talk about what happened between those two women. And I know they're dear friends of yours now to this day.
Yeah, so it was in Fort Myers Beach, Florida. And Tim and I, Norma was in the motorhome, and Tim and I were in the hot tub just hanging out, and this other couple was there, and we got to talking with them, and they actually lost 2 sons.
Oh, 2 sons.
Yeah, Norma had, Tim's sister had died, and this couple had lost both of their sons within 18 months of each other, young men, in their 20s. And so it was obvious that they were grieving, especially the mother. And when she met Norma, they connected on a level that we could never connect with her on. They were part of that club that no mother wants to be a part of, for their children to die before they do. And it was really difficult for Norma to really process the grief of losing her daughter. It was absolutely devastating, but she was quiet about it. And this was the first time that we saw some therapeutic things happening with her grief, with this stranger that we met in a hot tub in Florida. And she met up with us they both met up with us different places around the country while Norma was still alive. And then since she's died, and you even got to meet them a couple of years ago in Hilton Head. They came to spend time with us while we were there, and happened to be when we were meeting up with your book group. So
yeah, they happened to be in town
yeah.
when the book group at Hilton Head discussed the book, and you said, can we bring them along? And we said, absolutely. And I did get to meet them. So that was so special. And, I think we all have a special place in our hearts for the old friends mostly that we have. I just went to my 50-year high school reunion. And one of the things that occurred to me is I was just with a bunch of people who knew my parents, in particular my mother. And, none of my current friends knew my parents. And there's something special about people who kind of know that part of your life. I mean, it's a special bond, and they know that about you because they know Miss Norma.
Yeah. Yeah. And we met them before we went viral, and so it was just this, it wasn't the whole world focused on her. It was just this lovely little encounter that turned into a beautiful friendship.
So then I want to talk about the fact that you sell the book rights, you sell them domestic and international, you write the book, and then talk about the movie rights.
That actually all happened on the same day, Janet.
So did it happen on the same day?
Yeah, the day that we sold the U.S. rights to HarperCollins. Half an hour later, Fox Searchlight Pictures called and said, we'd like to buy the movie rights.
And they bought the movie rights to a book that had not one chapter written.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing. And so tell us about Miss Norma's reaction when you say we've sold the movie rights.
Well, she just kind of rolled her eyes and was like, whatever, we're just a couple knuckleheads driving around. Why is everyone making such a fuss about it, really? And then, a month or so later, they sent us the contract that we had to sign, the movie contract, which was as essentially signing our life away. Any kind of media that could possibly be invented in the future on a different planet, they owned the rights to, and so it was, a big, thick contract that Norma needed to sign and have notarized. And by the time we received it, her health had declined. She was under hospice care, hadn't been out of the motorhome for quite some time. And we had to get her to the notary downtown. They wouldn't come to us. And so we loaded her up in our car, and it was about, a 2-mile drive, not a big deal. And she has her oxygen on. And I asked her, Norma, I know you've had some time to think about this now, and I'm wondering if you've thought about who you'd like to play you in the movie. And she said, well, I actually have been thinking about this. And really, there's only one person that could do that. And I was, on the edge of my seat, like, who did she pick? And she said, well, I think I'm the only one that could play myself. And so I'm going to do it. And my heart sank because I knew that she was dying. And then I thought to myself, well, how do I, perk up this conversation a little bit? Because this is a happy occasion. And remembered back to a time when we were invited to go tour a gold mine in Dahlonega, Georgia. And she walked deep down into this gold mine and then back up again. It was incredible physical feat for someone in her condition. And I said, do you remember that day we went to the gold mine? And she said, oh, yes, I do. That was wonderful. And I said, if they wanted to do that scene in the movie, do you think you could still do it? And she said, well, if it was my job and I had to, I could do it. And again, I thought, oh, she really doesn't realize that she's dying. And then she said, like with perfect comedic timing, she said, but if I couldn't, or if they wouldn't let me, then Meryl Streep would do. And that was the end of the movie conversation.
Meryl Streep would do. So
Yeah.
what's the latest on the movie? Any latest? The screenplay's been written, right?
The screenplay's been written, but we learned that Hollywood is not super easy to work with, and things happen a lot. And so Fox Searchlight about a year and a half ago got bought by Disney. And so then Disney owned the rights and they dropped the project. And so now we are in the process of finding another financier for the movie, but it's looking pretty promising. There's a couple options out there. So we'll see.
That is terrific. Now, let me just tell you, Ramie, people are asking, Jane asked, are you still traveling all the time? So fill people in on what you guys decided to do and how what you decided to do involved Ed also and us meeting. So talk about being a looper.
Yeah. So after we wrote the book, we went on a big book tour around the country, and the last place we stopped was back in Michigan at Norma's house. So we hadn't been there. we didn't, when we left, we didn't even clean the house, so we walked into like this museum, and that's when the grief hit us of, we had this extraordinary experience, this epic journey, and then, wrote a book and went on a book tour and, had all this love. And then all of a sudden we were in this quiet old house by ourselves and got hit like a ton of bricks, and thought, what are we going to do now? We can't imagine crawling back in that big motorhome and just driving around it some more. And so I was being a total smart aleck with Tim. And I said, let's just buy a boat and go live on the water somewhere. And Tim doesn't even swim. He doesn't, it's not his, water was not his thing. And he, within minutes, was on the internet looking at boats. And within 2 weeks, we bought a boat and ended up on what's called America's Great Loop, which is a 6,000-mile circumnavigation of the eastern United States by waterway. And so we started in Lake Michigan and went through downtown Chicago and got dumped into all the river system, the Mississippi River, and then down, eventually ended up in Mobile, Alabama, crossed the Gulf, went around Florida and into the ICW and headed north. And what's on the way but Hilton Head Island. So we spent some great time with our newfound friends on Hilton Head and continued our journey on the loop. And then when it was time to make a decision where we wanted to spend like a whole winter, we were tired of constantly moving and thought, where would we like to spend a good chunk of time? And so it was the winter of 2019, 2020 that we spent on Hilton Head Island at Shelter Cove Marina.
And we love the fact that you've been all over the country and you picked Hilton Head as your favorite place to winter. I mean, not only did we get to meet, but, I think that's a tribute to how wonderful Shelter Cove is, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And we wanted to volunteer for hospice. And so Ringo became a hospet and got to visit around at all the different senior living communities in the area. And we felt like we built a nice little community with you guys. We love it.
And I just do have to do a little statement that Hospice Care of the Low Country is the only not-for-profit hospice in the area. We're celebrating our 40th year next year. It was created and managed, and still to this day, by volunteers who were passionate about having people, die with dignity and die with their wishes being honored. And so Hospice Care of the Low Country was thrilled when you and Ringo became volunteers for us. So I have to tell you, some people are asking what's next. And I remember, Ramie, I tell people about having dinner with you and Tim and saying, Tim, so are you going to write another book? And Tim said, Janet, did you read the book? We're nomads. We don't have a plan. And then I was like, Tim, so where are you going to go next? Janet, did you read the book? We're nomads. But I know you're nomads and you've been making it up as you go along, but you've sold the boat now, right?
Yeah, so our plan was to leave Hilton Head in the spring of 2020, trailer our boat to Washington State, and then cruise to Alaska through the Inside Passage. And then when COVID hit, the borders closed and cruising through Canada was not possible. And so we decided that we would sell the boat. Our friends out here in Friday Harbor, actually on the same property where Norma died, I can look out the window and see where we were parked. We've been staying here since then, trying to figure out what's next and feeling like this is a pretty safe place to be during all of COVID. And I'm so glad you asked, Janet, and you are the first person, my mother doesn't even know this, or my best friend, because it happened this morning, to learn that we just put a down payment on a new motorhome and we're ready to hit the road again.
Really?
So,
really?
Yeah, super excited. And so you'll see us again. We'll be back around.
So we have people saying that, you should write. Constance just said that you should write about a book about all your travels. Do you think you have another book in you?
I don't know. I mean, people told us that before we took Norma on. They were like, oh, you have an interesting life. You should write a book. And if you live in the world where we live out here, there's lots of people doing a lot of the very same things that we're doing, and we're not extraordinary. And so it never made sense until, until we did the thing with Norma. I don't know. We'll see. We don't have anything in the works right now, but never say never.
Well, I think you are leading an interesting life. And the thing that I think is so amazing about the fact that you wrote this book and, having, nixed the ghostwriter, is that you write with your book is so heartfelt. I mean, it's so full of love and adventure and so many messages, and it's so inspirational. And I think you guys are not giving yourself enough credit for what good writers you are and what good stories you have to tell. And so please pass along. Jim and I send our best to you and Tim. Please, he's the other part. We have significant others who are part of this duo here. But thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate it, Ramie. And I can't wait for the movie to come out. I'm going to buy out the movie theater. You told me. Do you want to mention what actress was interested in playing Miss Norma, or is that a secret?
Well, yeah, it's become a secret.
Oh, okay. It's
if you want to read between the lines. Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to say a very famous actress who you would love in the role, who Ramie, you can't mention if I told you, is interested in playing the lead. So Ramie, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you join us for other sessions that Wahi will be having. We're going to try to feature our special events this year. Amazing speakers and writers who write about resilience and who have a connection to Hilton Head. And Ramie certainly met those qualifications. So thank you, Ramie, and please join us for our next session. Bye-bye. We love you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.